So it's my pleasure to introduce Massimo Morini, who is currently the chief economist at Algorand. Algorand, as you may know, is one of the most successful and interesting blockchain, great technology. And they are developing in new phases of governance, which is relevant for our purposes. Massimo has had many roles with many different international institutions from the sector. He's teaching in probably universities and many other things that I don't want to waste time given we are a bit later listing. So I'm happy to give the floor to Massimo. Please welcome Massimo with a round of applause.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, actually, when we spoke with Andrea about this speech for this evening, we were thinking mostly of a topic around governance. Actually, I will probably be talking more specifically about governance tomorrow afternoon during the smart contract workshop, because I realized that there is a speech, there is a presentation that I'm giving in several places in this week that was much nearer to the topic also of the panel that we have later, and in a sense very much related to the news that we are seeing in these days on the newspapers and on TV. Since I want to talk a little bit of what could be the future of private digital money. Private digital money may be for many, for example, stable coins of cryptocurrencies, and that actually fits into that. But for me, the most interesting way of thinking of private digital money is what could happen to our system if not only the central banks or governments decided, to adopt blockchain technology or something similar, but what would happen if also private issuers of money, and you know that nowadays 95% of the money we use is issued privately, because it's issued by banks, actually decided to move to blockchain technology. And part of the conclusions that I reached when thinking of this topic is realizing that it's very, very unlikely that we will ever have a real CBDC, central bank form of money, which is digital, if we don't also move at the same time money issued by banks towards a digital and more modern form. Well, in a sense, this first slide touches upon the different topics of the presentation, but touches upon a little bit also the different roles that I had in my career. Because I started from working in banking, and more recently I had a period in which I was board member of R3, that consortium for private blockchains. And then in the end, I ended up being the chief economist of a large public blockchains. I find, in a sense, that I've always been working essentially in the same sector. What I mean by that? The story of what we're talking about, banks, blockchains, digital money, digital ledgers, is a story that starts very, very long. In a sense, as it starts talking about history, because you know that we usually put the beginning of history at the beginning of writing, the moment in which human beings decide to start writing or invent writing. And one interesting thing is that you may believe that the first things that human beings felt the need to write was maybe a great poem or maybe a scientific theorem. No, not at all. Human beings started to write because they needed to do accounting. Particularly the really oldest forms of writing that we have that come from Mesopotamia, that there was probably a parallel invention in China, a parallel invention in South America, but they were relatively similar. The one in Mesopotamia is the one that probably we have studied more, and probably also the earliest. And it's pretty obvious that the need was essentially to make some accounting of what was going in and out of the temples in Mesopotamia that were also the centers of the trading and commerce of the city. And essentially, we can say that accounting was the beginning of writing. It was the beginning, if you want, of mathematics, because part of this science had to represent numbers and to represent at least addition and subtraction in doing accounting, and it was essentially the first form of ledger that we have ever seen. And we can even define the technology used in that ledger as single entry account, essentially a list of quantities of goods. And essentially the technology of ledgers doesn't have any big innovation until the Renaissance, when we have the introduction of double entry accounting. You know that double entry accounting is quite a massive increase in sophistication, because you start having a balance sheet with actually a right and left side that logically basically means that for every economic event that you want to record, you essentially need to write down where the resources or the money come from and where they actually go. So essentially, who is the giver and who is the receiver, which may be two different accounts of your company, or maybe a client and instead someone that gives you raw materials. And this improvement in accounting has almost immediately pretty big consequences. Then obviously, in a sense, the economy felt the need of this improvement because other things were happening, but certainly the improvement in accounting becomes a necessary enabler from what happens immediately after, which is the fact that double entry accounting starts being used by banks, and banks move themselves from being essentially custodian of gold or other goods into actually becoming creator essentially of digital money, because they start essentially representing their wealth across the world through a ledger. So that in a sense, even if maybe, I don't know, Medici Bank was holding gold in Florence, if there was a need, in a sense, to moving this gold to the King of France in Paris, you didn't have to actually set up a car full of gold and move it from Florence to Paris. You simply send a message that said, guys, we have actually to update the ledger of the Paris branch in order to reduce the amount of money that is ours and is actually in our central account in Paris, and increase the one of the King of France, because we're moving this money to him. And then after this we have essentially the beginning of credit, which is also based on the beginning of banks, and we have essentially the beginning of capitalism. The third essentially big breakthrough in accounting is the one that many people do not usually call like this, but is the one associated to the birth of blockchains. Often, when talking about blockchain from the point of view of accounting, the reference is so-called triple entry accounting. It was an innovation introduced by a Japanese professor, Yuri in the 80s, essentially. It was the first idea of using cryptography, and in particular digital signatures, in ledgers, essentially. And that is what's called, in fact, triple entry accounting. Why triple entry accounting? Because you don't only have the giver and the receiver, but you also have their digital signatures. essentially, which brings this idea to reality and brings this idea not to a traditional ledger, but to a distributed ledger across the internet, decentralized ledger. And in this sense, it makes full usage, in a sense, it exploits in the best way this conceptual innovation, because through this conceptual innovation, he actually manages to create a ledger which is self-sufficient to represent the digital economy. You know, in the ledger, you have all the assets, you have all the events. The events have a signature of the giver. In a sense, you don't need in Bitcoin the signature of the receiver, the receipt, because in any case, everyone sees that a certain account has received the money. And we are at the beginning of blockchain and everything we are talking about. So, in a sense, from banks that created the first form of digital money and the first form of modern ledgers to blockchain, there's not such a big conceptual difference. You know, even if during 500 years, the role of banks has become something very different, you know, from what it was at the beginning, and it's hard for us now to remember that essentially they were private big innovators in an economy that at times was limited to kings moving gold across them. Nowadays, banks have an incredible role in our economy, even a creepy role in a sense, you know, if we consider how big it is. And it's probably worth in these days having a look a little bit at what is the situation of money and banks nowadays. Nowadays, we have so-called currency or cash, which has remained as a sort of residual part of money, very small percentage of the money in the hands of people is still represented by physical cash, few percentage points. There is a huge amount, 95%, of the money in the hands of let's say of how to say, I mean, if we exclude what is only in the hands of financial institutions, 90% of the money in the hands of households and corporates is now commercial bank money, money issued and created by banks. And then there is a third category, which has become particularly important in the last few decades, which is central bank money or money represented by reserves at the central bank, which is something that so far only banks can have. And in a sense, starting from 500 years ago, the role that banks have taken is probably a little bit different than what we could find in textbooks, you know, from the 20th century. Because nowadays banks have fundamental role essentially of deciding about the creation of money. Because nowadays the main form of money creation is when banks actually give credit to the economy. There is a typical idea that we have, I mean, obviously, I think that there are still people around the world that believe that when we bring our money to a bank, the bank, in a sense, custody our money that remains there. Everyone here knows that this is not the case. Actually, the money that we give to the banks is actually lent out to students. Guys, even this is a little bit naive, because the real story is that banks essentially give credit to those that they believe are worth it, no matter if they have deposits enough or not. Because the moment in which they decide that a certain borrower is worth receiving, let's say, a mortgage, what happens is that they essentially credit this mortgage on an account for this guy. And in this moment, no matter if they have any extra deposit to use or not, the new loan is automatically matched by the new deposit where you actually put the money for the guy who received the loan. Through this technique, essentially today, monetary expansion is in the hands of banks. So what's the role of the central bank? Of course, the central bank is very important in this role because it essentially decides what is the level of reserves that banks need to have, but also consider that central banks usually, when banks require more resources, they are very happy to provide them, usually considering the assets of banks as collateral, they are very happy to provide additional liquidity to banks. So the role of central banks in deciding the amount of money is very indirect. For example, regulators set rules about who should receive how many loans, how risky the loans that the banks can do actually can be. Obviously, in this way, it sets some constraints to the expansion of money as well. And in fact, nowadays, when we talk about the failure of Silicon Valley Bank or First Republic, there is a new one almost every week. One of the issues is that they were lending, in a sense, in a way that was a little bit too risky, or in any case, they were taking risks in bonds that are actually now damaging the asset side of banks. That was matched by the liability side, that was essentially the money that banks were creating in the form of the bond. Another thing which is very interesting is that in the last few years, we are having the transformation of the usual way in which banks actually transfer money. Probably many people that are interested in blockchain know that blockchain wanted to replace the so-called correspondent banking model, which is the traditional way of moving money across banks that, in a sense, as a logic, dates back to the Renaissance, to the point that is based on creating accounts among banks, in which banks link to each other with these accounts, and these accounts are called nostro and vostro, and the names are in Italian because they go back to the time of the Renaissance when first banks were created. It essentially work like this. For me, that I am Alice and I've got an account at Bank Alpha, to move money to you that are Bob and you have an account at Bank Beta, we exploit the fact that Alpha has got an account of Beta at essentially Beta at some point opened an account with Alpha. And for the reverse transaction, we also need that Alpha at some point opened an account at Beta. But now we are only interested on one side. So how can Alice send money to Bob? Essentially, Alice let Alpha Bank know that they want to move money to Bob, which is in Bank Beta. And what is happening is that Bank Alpha is actually reducing the account of Alice by, say, $10, and it is increasing the account of Bank Beta by this $10. Then they send a message to Beta and they say, notice, your account is now $10 bigger, but that's not really for you. You should actually then increase the account of your client, Bob, by these $10. Notice that compared to this central example of how money is moved, there is a simpler case, which is when the Alice and Bob both have accounts at the same bank. And this is easier because it's one single ledger or one single institution, and you just have to reduce the amount of money in Alice account and increase the one in Bob account, so they are just two entries in a ledger. But there is also a more complicated case, which is the one in which Alpha and Beta are not in a correspondent banking relationship, so they do not have this nostro vostro account, but actually Alpha is in a correspondent relationship with some intermediary bank, and this intermediary bank is in the same relationship with Beta. But obviously, when you create an additional intermediary, the process actually has got one additional hole. That often means that you require more time to move money, because usually banks prefer to actually settle these these balances related to the transfer of money of their clients at the end of the day in a net way. So if you have only two banks involved, maybe the transfer takes 24 hours. If you have two hopes, you may even have 2 days for an international transfer. That's the reason why at times international transfer can be solved. But in a sense, this has changed in the last decades, because in Europe with Target 2 and in the US with Fedwire, very often banks can actually, obviously, only American banks with American banks, and European banks with European banks, more international transfer still follow typical correspondent banking. But within the US or within the Euro area, often transfers happen through the centralized central bank system, in which the transfer of a deposit is directly settled in central bank money, and it becomes a real-time, essentially, transaction, a gross transaction, so you don't need to wait until the end of the day for do netting. And essentially, it is operated on a centralized system, the system of the central bank, which has got accounts of all the banks of the monetary area, and this allows, obviously, the system to be much more efficient, because again, we go back to a situation in which there is one ledger, and to move money, I don't know, from Intesa Sanpaolo to Barclays Bank, but Barclays is in UK, so let's say BNP Paribas, you only have to reduce the amount that is written on the line that represents Intesa Sanpaolo and increase by the same amount the line that represents the money of BNP Paribas. So in a sense, we can first essentially understand the different features of our money, and realize essentially that while coins and banknotes had pretty good features, because as you know, nowadays, coins and banknotes not only have instant settlement, because obviously with coins and banknotes, settlement is just the moment in which you actually move money from you to the seller. They also are essentially a form of money which is free of credit risk, because that's the truth. Since since the end of gold standards, we actually, fiat money has got a value of its own, and the moment you receive a payment in fiat money, in cash, there is still no risk. While instead, if we look at commercial bank money, we realize that in terms of technical properties, it seems to be rather weak, because it is a form of money based on debt, on the credit that banks create. So if you have a deposit in a bank, there is a credit risk associated to that, and we have seen how real it is in the last weeks. We know that when the correspondent banking model is used, the settlement and the transfer is rather low, cumbersome across banks. What obviously makes commercial bank money king in any case is the fact that nowadays is the only form of money that runs through the internet. It's the only one which is electronic. If you want, that is already digital. You can move it on the internet, just changing some bits on a digital ledger. Clearly, there are two alternatives that instead enjoy all these properties together from a technical point of view. No credit risk, instant settlement, and being digital and electronic. One is central bank reserves, the digital electronic accounts that banks have at the central bank, but only banks have them, not normal people. And the other one are cryptocurrencies based on blockchains that, however, apart from the nice technical features, have no recognition from states, government, finance, and so they remain very volatile, as we know for cryptocurrencies. Their legal status remain uncertain, and so in a sense, it's not really that these two kinds of money can change the world. So, as you know, central banks are talking a lot about the idea of a CBDC, a central bank digital currency. And now we are getting into something real. When they actually talk about CBDCs, they start now coming out with sort of roadmaps. And if you want, there is something that I'm finding pretty curious about this discussion. Yeah, I'm actually quoting the ECB, but something similar was said also by the Bank of England and any other bank that in these days is thinking of issuing a CBDC. Essentially, the logic that they wanna pass is that they wanna create a central bank digital currency, because considering that cash is less and less useful for the kind of payments we make now, they wanna go back to a situation in which people can have money directly issued by the central bank, actually with no credit risk attached, and they want to increase, in a sense, this quantity in the pockets of people. A natural question that arose, and many banks started to pose this question very quietly, obviously without wanting to appear against this project, but they said, wait a second, if you create a form of money which is electronic and backed by the central bank, and maybe even on blockchain technology, which is a superior technology, certainly to what banks do now, aren't we actually running the risk that people will only want having CBDCs and they will abandon deposits, actually creating bank runs and defaults of banks? And in a sense, I mean, can I tell you one thing? I think that there is some correlation between the fact that central banks spoke this way and the fact that we are really seeing an apparently unexpected moment of bank defaults in these very days. I was very surprised personally, and the person that has been in banking for many years, but now is even in cryptocurrencies, that seems to be the total opposite, to hear the central banks speaking like this, because they seem to imply that a form of money which is issued by the central bank is safer than the money we have in banks. I still have money in banks, even if I work for a cryptocurrency. And this is a reasoning that should worry. So for some reason, apparently central banks were getting aware that the banking system was not so solid, to the point of advertising the CBDC as a way to put more central bank money in the deposit. But then obviously on the other end, central banks are aware that they cannot kill the banking system. Is the backbone of the current monetary system. So they immediately said, no, wait a moment. We are not going to risk anything like this. First of all, because we are going to issue a very little amount of CBDC. And then they started to come out with numbers. The Bank of England said, according to our analysis, no more than 10,000 or maximum 20,000 pounds for each UK citizen will be cleared. But the ECB said something even more surprising, because they said, no more than 3,000–4,000 euros for every European citizen. In Italy, the Italian Bank Association made an analysis and said, wait a second. If you are saying this because, in a sense, CBDC needs to replace cash, in the moment in which cash is used, that's even too much. No more than 600–800 euros of CBDC for seems irrelevant. How can this be relevant? And secondly, they say another reason why banks will never be disintermediated by that is that the management of the CBDC will all be in the hands of banks. They will make the transfers, they will manage the deposits and the accounts exactly the same way as they do now with deposits. So come on. So in this case, you are probably throwing away all the advantages that you may have from going to blockchain technology. And I do think that, in a sense, this narrative about CBDC is a little bit hopeless. Because if they really had to issue such a little amount, that would be irrelevant. But how do you really manage in a free economy to put a hard cap the amount of money that every individual can have? An individual cap to the amount of money that you can have, something that you have never seen in a free economy. I'm not even sure that all communist countries ever manage, to impose something like that. At the same time, the CBDC will never be a replacement for cash because it doesn't have the same rules. In order to have, obviously, at times we use cash because we are maybe on an island which is more remote than the island where we are now, and maybe there could be problems in use. Oh, taxi driver today for me from Split station to the ferry did not have a credit card. We could cash it useful in these moments, but a digital currency, a central bank digital currency, would never be useful in moments in which you don't have the technology. At times people use cashes because they don't want to be seen. They want to pay taxes. They don't want to. Also, in this case, certainly a central bank issues digital currencies will never be used for that kind of use case. So, in a sense, the only use case that remains, which is similar to cash, is the fact that cash is money that we really control. We keep it in our pockets, we keep it under the mattress or in a vault, and that's potentially ours. We don't need an intermediary. If we want to use blockchain technology the way it is now available in public blockchains, yes, we can create digital currency with this feature. But these things contradictory with central bank actually saying that no, to avoid the risk of more bank runs because of CBDC, actually, we are going to give to banks the total management of this form of money. I do actually believe that the narrative about the CBDC could be much better if we went back to what are the reasons why essentially digital currencies or cryptocurrencies or blockchain technology is really interesting. And it is the possibility to actually add something to what is the internet technology, which is used for the exchange of information, and actually create the possibility of a network of value, of a network of transactions on the internet, which would not be possible with basic internet technology. Why? Essentially because, as we know pretty well, on the internet, we don't have an identity, any form of stable identity, while instead a blockchain tries to replace it with, to supplement this lack of an identity on the internet with the fact that you have a public and a private key, your digital signature, so you can have, even if pseudonymous, a stable identity that allows you to have some property, an account where you keep the words. Crucial, to make the internet a network of value. We also know that in the internet, because of the way the different layers are designed, we do not have any objective time stamping, any objective order of messages. We do not have an arrow of times, in the different parts in the internet. This is not a big issue if you need to transfer a picture, because the transport layer, in any case, will remember, the ordering that the sender made. But if your messages are transactions, lack of an objective timestamping becomes a serious issue, because now there is the possibility of doing double spending frauds, exploiting this. And the blockchain introduces consensus algorithms in their layer, in their part of the application layer, and create an order, a unique order that allows to actually have transaction and have an economy. And then let me say that the client-server model is incredibly subject to centralization. How many search algorithms do we have? One. How many social networks for middle-aged people, boomers we have? One. How many social networks people for kids? One, TikTok. How many for cool young people? Instagram, one. No. So clearly, with money, if we try to do, I think that there was a person that worked in Libra during during the dinner we had before. If you think of Libra, that in my opinion was a great project, but also a little bit creepy, you were going to have one simple form of money that everyone could use, managed essentially by one company. Then you say, oh, we use blockchain technology and we choose 100 validators that are other companies. In any case, it was a radical centralization, which is in a sense the typical centralization of every client server logic. Thanks God, the blockchain instead uses distributed system, uses peer-to-peer. So even if you are internet, you can keep a form of decentralization. Otherwise, guys, if we had a management of money, the same way in which we manage, search engines, so one or two in the world, we should actually say that the banking system was incredibly decentralized compared to that, So in a sense, blockchain technology is really relevant to bring some incredible changes to the way money works, potentially to create money that does not depend so much on an intermediary that physically makes the transaction possible, as in correspondent banking, or even when you go through the central bank system in order to make transaction. But for some reason, today, the reasoning about CBDCs is not focusing on the technology, to the point, not focusing on the efficiency you can get, on the programmability you can get, on the possibility of really going back to money which is in control of the people, also reducing the risk associated to the existence of banks. It focuses a little bit too much to the importance for money to be back from the central bank, because it's like putting the spotlight on the fact that probably the banking system is a little bit weak, but in that case, the solution is not creating a little amount of currency that competes with banks, because that doesn't satisfy us in any case, because it does not allow us to replace our money with CBDC. And on the other hand, it's enough to create tension, because if in transactions, for example, in a moment of crisis, merchants said, no, sorry, I only want to receive CBDC, that could still create strong issues to the banking system. In any case, since we are running out of time, there are a few things that I want to put down as elements of discussion. Then we actually have a panel on a similar topic later on. About the existence of banks and bank deposits, we have to remember that there are some things that we really don't like, and I'm sure that almost everyone doesn't like it. The fact that in any case, commercial bank money is subject to credit risk, the fact that fractional reserves is revealing to be particularly low at this time, the fact that money in banks is actually controlled by banks themselves. You cannot make a transaction without going to a bank, different from blockchain, which you just put your digital signature. And that essentially means that banks can stop you from withdrawing, and this in a sense increases the incentive for you to actually think, okay, since these guys can stop me, as soon as possible, as soon as I get some bad news about this bank, I try to take my money out. But there are also some rules that commercial bank money has got, and we still don't have a solution to replace it, for example, in the blockchain place. Today, banks provide most of the credit to the economy. They actually do this in a decentralized way, which every bank, in a sense, also because of its different local role, knows better the different realities and the different borrowers. And also, so far, banks have this incredible role of transforming assets that would be risky and illiquid into liabilities that can even be used like money. This was an incredible role. Maybe now we are in a situation in which we are realizing that there is the risk that they don't manage to do that anymore. But that in any case is going to be a big shock for our economy. Now I wanted to point out a couple of technical points that I wasn't even thinking of mentioning yet. Probably one element that is making the banking system more fragile now is not only, as many people has mentioned, the fact that you know, with online banking and so on, it's easier for people to move money from a bank to another one. But also the fact that the focus that regulators and central banks, after the big financial crisis, put on abandoning the correspondent banking model and requiring central bank settlement, you know, for many internal transactions inside a country or inside a monetary system, means that nowadays, when people start moving deposits away from say, Signature or SVB Bank to JP Morgan, this is actually moving central bank money out of their reserves in order to settle the transaction with the other bank. So if in correspondent banking, the fact that someone was moving the deposits to another bank was only compensated by another deposit of a bank with another bank, now with central bank settlement, when, for example, Circle moved its 4 billion of USDC reserve out of Silicon Valley Bank, actually it was exactly like going to an ATM and withdrawing in the second 4 billion. So already I've heard someone saying it's not really the moment in which we can think of adopting a technology like blockchain, which is so rapid, so efficient, because this rapidity may become an issue, you know. See what is happening, what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. No, we are already there. There's nothing, this is already happening. Maybe if we actually move to a form of technology to move money that, first of all, gives more control potentially to owners of money to make their transactions without risk of being frozen by the bank. This reduces a little bit the fear of you know, that generates a bank run. If we use a technology which is programmable, because notice that one thing is the central bank that sees an enormous amount of deposits that go away from First Republic and decides somehow to intervene because they reduce that First Republic is depleting all of its central bank reserves and they don't know what to do. And at the end they say, oh, we cannot let them default. We cannot select some of the depositors. And so we pay them out. I think instead of a system based on smart contracts in which this risk was considered, in which the waterfall of people withdrawing was actually controlled with smart contracts. Maybe, considering that the speed, the problem of speed, the problem of being digital is already there, let's at least go to the really modern, to the contemporary way of making digital money that gives you many more advantages together, you know, with the fact of being digital and efficient. And then let me stop it because so at least we talk about governance at the very end. Notice that all this story about CBDCs and the fact that now also banks continue talking about tokenizing deposits and moving also their own money to this new technology means changing a lot the fundamental business model of banks. Why? Because so far, banks have been essentially the settlement platform. So when we needed to settle a transfer, we actually went to a bank, and the bank infrastructure allowed me to transfer money to do settlement. To the point that until a few years ago, we were speaking about open banking that said banks should create API that allows, fintech companies to use this API to make payments. The bank was the infrastructure that was used to make payments. And no one remembered that the real role of banks, the fact that they were issuing the money, and we should have focused on that. They should have focused on risk management of their assets, because their assets were those used to create the money that were the liabilities. If eventually we move to a world in which bank money becomes digital, maybe together also with central bank money that becomes digital on something similar to blockchain technology, eventually we revert the model. Now the settlement platform is decoupled from the issue. No? In a sense, if you want, even cryptocurrencies today have this problem. No? And people get confused. What is Algorand? Is Algorand the technology, or is Algorand the cryptocurrency? It's both, but in a sense, why? The two things could be totally decoupled. And the same, actually, on blockchain technology could happen with banks. By the way, banks are now seeing this kind of technology. They are still frightened by that, but they are seeing it as a possible heaven, because if really they have to stop caring about the managing the settlement platform, that is not a platform today, is every bank. It represents a settlement platform, and then in their agreement with the other banks or with the central bank, they allow general settlement across all the economy. But if they really delegate this to a decentralized network, this would reduce dramatically their cost, would reduce dramatically their systemic relevance, and that would reduce their fee also. But fees are going down in any case, so that would be an advantage for them. But now we have to start thinking, how do we imagine this blockchain-based platform in which both commercial bank money issued maybe by, I mean, I don't like this idea of tokenized deposits. I like the idea of private money, which is issued on a blockchain, and that could be actually banks that embrace blockchain technology, or blockchains and what are now cryptocurrencies that decide to take something similar to a banking license, to actually issue with some form, maybe also of a fractional reserve, probably not similar to the one we have now. In blockchain, even something like a fractional reserve would be much more transparent, more programmable. But how do we imagine this platform? Do we imagine really one single platform? We imagine several, blockchains that become interoperable. And how do we envisage the governance of this platform? Should it be run by the central bank alone? There is an enormous risks in the idea of total centralization around the central bank, and that would also make some of the features. Think of what I was saying before. Having a decentralized network where you can set objective rules would make some things much easier for the central bank, rather than having to decide them on any transaction, including the one that, if they actually do not, if they, for example, decide to allow it, may actually represent the default of, Silicon Valley Bank. So they feel at that point, obliged to actually bail it out. Instead, a decentralized platform may have built-in rules, may have programmability that would help them as well. Who would run the nodes? The issuers, also just the users, and then a big problem that banks, blockchains already are experiencing. Even if the consensus algorithm, in a sense, can solve the role of who validates transaction, and this is also sort of governance of the blockchain, when we move to the next level of governance, so who maintains the ledger, who decides if there are updates to make, who actually takes the decision that And this is still a question mark. This is still a question mark. And in a case, it's a big issue that we need to solve now that we are talking about CBDCs. Now that we realize that CBDCs alone are not solving the problem, we have to find a solution also for commercial bank money. And in a sense, tomorrow in the work about smart contracts, that I will focus a little bit more on my experience with the governance of blockchain. Now we tried to decentralize the governance. We had goals on the most important things, and we realized many of the issues that you have when you have to try to govern in a decentralized way at decentralized. I think I have spent more time than it was originally planned. So sorry and thank you very much.
Thank you, Massimo. Don't go away because I think we have still a couple of minutes for question, if there are any. I come first to the floor, and we also let's do it this way. We will monitor the chat. So for those of you who are connected live, if you have a question, you can start typing in them on the chat, and I will try to read them for you. So I'm coming first to the first question. Please introduce yourself.
Hi there. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for the really wonderful presentation, Massimo. You touched on some really core points. So I'm Jeff Goodell from University College London, and I wanted to say bravo. You have demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt, actually, that CBDC is not a replacement for bank deposits, and it's not a replacement for cash. So it must be a replacement for something else. So the question is, what is that something else? Now, I think you're right to point out that there's something strange about this limit to how much individuals can hold of CBDC that has been proposed indeed by the Bank of England, by the ECB, and the Banca d'Italia. And I think that if we look at this really closely, we can start to understand why. Let's start with the red herrings, right? The idea that bank runs are going to be a problem, that people are going to convert all of their bank deposits into CBDC in a hurry. Well, we don't need to impose limits to block that. In fact, anyone who remembers the Brexit debate from 12 years ago will remember that we actually can just reduce the amount that people can withdraw cash from ATMs. We could do the same thing. We could do the same thing with CBDC, right? And in terms of people avoiding taxes, well, you can impose restrictions on who receives money without actually imposing any identity on the spenders of money. So certainly the idea of identity layers, we can apply it in a way that protects the privacy of consumers. We know how to do this. So we'd like to suggest, or I'd like to ask you, who do you think, what do we think CBDC is really present? And now we can argue that there are bank deposits might be reduced, but in that same Bank of England study that you cited, they observed that the effect on credit would be negative. So it must be something else. And I suspect we have it in our pockets.
I may try a guess. There is potentially a way of thinking of these limits that should probably create no big threat to cash and no big threat to deposit, but big threat to another thing. That's in a sense what we are suggesting in the last slide of this presentation. This presentation is 1 month long, and I have already heard someone from central bank probably understanding some of the points that we were discussing tonight and proposing something different. A slightly more realistic idea of CBDC is the idea that CBDC will be linked to our deposits, and essentially every one of us will have a certain amount of central bank money that will be used sort of automatically when they are essentially using their, let's say, cash. Yes, but why I don't want to say credit card?
Because
Yeah.
that shows who could be threatened by that.
Exactly.
Suppose that the limitation is that essentially you go and make purchase, and automatically this purchase is made by the, let's say, the CBDC reserve of your deposits. You know, the first layer. You know, in that case, something interesting would happen, because since you'd be settling into central bank money, that would be RTGS, that would be essentially a real-time transaction. And that would eliminate the need for using a credit card, essentially, you know, that could be actually a better usage. But that, in a sense, strengthens even more what is my main point. Essentially, in this way, the CBDC becomes a sort of reserve of in central bank money of everyone's deposits. So deposits themselves need to be digitized, need to be brought to the same technology that we know now that allows you to have, you know, immediate settlement, even if you are in a decentralized system. And we are moving towards something that is more logical. So thank you for the question, because it allowed me to say something that I wanted to say, but there was no time in the very.
Right, and that is digital cash, and therefore we know that debit cards and credit cards are having their Kodak moment.
That, in a sense, could be really a solution of what is, in a sense, a misconception, you know, because we are using credit cards simply because our money. One may think that we use credit cards because we really need credit. Most of us don't use credit cards because they need credit. They use credit cards because when you want to pay with digital money, obviously the merchant wants to see the settlement to actually give you the goods, you know. But if you use the traditional commercial bank money, the settlement is net at the end of day or 2 days after. If you can do that with money that settles immediately, really these credit cards are no more needed. Because it was not true that we needed credit, we only needed rapid settlement. And that, in a sense, if I can say something, does not even actually require central banks. It would be enough using technology that now is available, you know, but that's not it. Any other questions?
From the floor? Any other question from the floor? Any other question from people that are connected remotely? Yes, no, happy like this.
Is it the chat?
Huh?
The chat. Are there questions in the chat?
No, question in chat, I don't see. So
Okay,
I'm on the
let's-
different. Can you open the chat of this?
No questions.
Huh?
I can find a new question. It's just exactly that.
So I have a connection.
But I don't find a new question.
Chat,
Yeah,
that's okay.
I don't find any new question.
Okay, there doesn't seem to be.
It's time to switch that.
Okay,
Fine.
okay, let's thank Massimo last time. Thank you, Massimo. Very nice. Thank you.
Now this looks like the worst.
Yeah. Okay, so